Hey everyone, welcome to today's third in a series of webinars that we're hosting through Boston College's Cybersecurity Policy and Governance program here at Boston College in the Wood School of Advancing Studies. I'm Professor Kevin Powers, and I'm the founder and director of our cybersecurity programs here at Boston College. And we have with us today a great friend, someone I know pretty much forever. Since high school, Bill Corrigan, and I'll pass it over to Bill in a few minutes so Bill can tell you a bit about himself. Bill's currently an expert associate partner at McKinsey Digital, which is part of McKinsey and Company. Before we jump in, I'll just give a couple of ground rules. First, you're great, ask as many questions as you have. Please use the chat. We'll get to the questions as they pop up, although we might be able to answer a lot of the questions as we move along in the presentation as we talk. So a lot of those questions might be held off to the end, but we will get to them nonetheless. What's our goal today? Our goal is to define for you smart cities. What are they? That's why we brought Bill here. What they do, current trends, where things are going with smart cities. And then we're going to talk about how do we secure them? How do we protect them? And we're going to talk about the different threats, mitigation strategies, and best practices. And most importantly, why you're here, why should you care? Why should you care about smart cities? Well, a smart city is coming to your city pretty soon. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Bill. Bill, and if you could, and this is what we do with all our classes, and I know this is a webinar, but if you could, tell our attendees, a bit about your background, how you got involved in tech and security, and your current position at McKinsey.
Sure, Kev.
Oh yeah, and one other thing, you can tell them how I used to tear you up on the basketball court way back at BC High.
yeah, I was the slow one that you used to just do 360 spins by, no problem. No, thanks for having me. It's really exciting. I always get excited to talk to folks in the local universities about some of the stuff that we do at McKinsey. I'm like a kid in a candy shop, frankly, at McKinsey, because I like to solve hard problems, and we're constantly brought lots of different hard problems to solve from our clients. As you mentioned, my specialty is digital, and actually, I'll just go ahead and share my screen. I actually have, okay, you need to allow me, Kev, to share.
Okay, hold on one second, Bill.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go.
It's all yours.
All right. There we go.
Yeah, and I got to admit, you told me you're going to show up with 2 to 3 slides, and I think there's 500. So
yeah,
I'm impressed at the work you've done.
That's typical of McKinsey. And we won't use them all, but I wanted to have them available. And then we also will make these available for folks in a PDF afterward. So, and I put a bunch in the appendix. We literally are doing super detailed work on smart cities, IoT, cybersecurity constantly. And so there's a lot of great content that's being generated by many of my colleagues and myself here at McKinsey.
Sure.
So I wanted to just jump in sort of with my background. As you mentioned, so what I do at McKinsey is I'm part of McKinsey Digital and primarily something called LEAP, which is not an acronym. It's just basically the name that we've given to our digital business building effort. And it's really fun. I get to work on helping either cities or municipalities or private sector clients develop IoT type products, IoT services, delivering value either to their citizens or to their customers. And it's a lot of fun. So I get to leverage a lot of my background, which was primarily in business to business, high tech, both at Microsoft and IBM and Lotus early in my career, as well as some of the B2C stuff I did at Shark Ninja, which is a local Boston company, and then Living Planet, which was one of the early smart city vendors. We started talking about smart city, myself and a few other ex-Microsoft people about nearly 10 years ago now, and started working with early early adopter type customers across the globe in developing. At that time, it was primarily use case based. So a city or someone would come to us and say, hey, we want to have smart lighting, or we want to have a public Wi-Fi that's powered by solar or something along those lines. Now what we're seeing is cities looking at digital as being part and parcel of their entire operations. And it's no longer sort of these stovepiped kind of operations that you see. So we sort of got past that early adopter phase, and now we're getting more into mainstream. Virtually every city is doing something around smart city. Boston, as a matter of fact, is one of the leaders, and primarily because our leadership has actually started to look at this 20 years ago. The prior mayor brought some really smart people on board and started to look at how can we use technology to make things better for our citizens. And you see it with things like the Hubway bike system, or they call it the Blue Bikes now, which are terrific. And it's an excellent example of an IoT type application, which has real-time sensors on the bikes, and you're constantly knowing exactly where the bikes are, which docking stations have things available, and so forth. But also, if you look at what we did at the Seaport and Kendall Square, those are two major innovation districts that were led by innovative leaders at the city level and state level. So we're kind of lucky in that regard. On the page here, you see some of the studies that I've recently worked on. Really cool stuff. As I mentioned, we just developed a base modernization for military bases. So if you think of many military bases around the globe, they have sort of modern technology when it comes to weapons and things like that. But oftentimes when you look at the tools that they're using, or some of the networks they're using, or simple things like managing a warehouse, they're doing things, it looks like 1982. So we're helping sort of.
That's being generous. I can tell you from my Navy days.
Right, right, exactly. So I was just on site with one of the military bases where, we're implementing a drone-based inventory management system for them. Well, we're not implementing it; they're implementing it themselves. We're helping them understand the technology, helping them see which vendors are out there that can help them, helping them keep their costs down, which is also something that kind of is not, they're not used to sometimes in some parts of the government. But it's really fun. Some of the other projects here that kind of stand out is we've been working quite a bit with in the smart building space, which is tied very closely with smart cities. You can't have a smart city if you don't have smart buildings dispersed throughout it. And what we're seeing is a major metamorphosis in that because of COVID. So what used to be sort of, hey, we'll start to implement some sensors in our buildings, and we'll start to collect some data in order to drive our OpEx costs down for HVAC or lighting or energy consumption. Now it's becoming, hey, we need to be able to track our employees. We need to be able to do contact tracing and enforce social distancing. And we want to be able to make sure that we keep people safe with return to work kind of principles. In addition to just sort of the apocryphal perspective that many of the real estate developers are dealing with right now, where many of their clients or tenants are rethinking how much office space they actually need, in work from home scenarios. And so how are they repurposing some of that investment that they've built to do that? So you get a feel for sort of what I do right now. And usually what I do is I work with clients, on site, or now obviously through Microsoft Teams or Zoom, all the way through from the time we start whiteboarding out a solution to delivering it, to helping them develop their agile squads, hire the right talent, and that kind of thing. So it's kind of, it leans heavily on my background, which was sort of startups, Microsoft, IBM, and others.
Okay, so Bill, to jump in here, I mean, you gave a good background on the IoT and the smart, but exactly what do we mean by smart cities? Like, where does this all come into play?
Yeah, it's a good point. So we'll start in with just sort of a real basic. Everybody probably already understands this, but I wanted to sort of do a sort of understanding of what is IoT itself. So the Internet of Things, and it's really using sensors and connected devices. A sensor could be a camera. It could be a sensor that's a humidity sensor or air quality or something in a vehicle. Combining that with the proper software and data and analytics to yield some type of result, whether it's a better product. In the case of my Shark Ninja days, we were making robot vacuums, for instance, that were really cool little robot vacuums that were help people, connected vacuums, help them clean their house, reducing the operations cost of operations. So if you look at most modern factories now, they're using some form of IoT, or new business models. And this is actually a kind of a fun one for me, in that, I was working recently with a 100-year-old company that makes doors and locks and power tools. And, their traditional model is they sell to Best Buy or Home Depot or whomever, and that's it. And they never talk to their customer again. Now we're reinventing their business. So they actually have a SaaS-based business. They have recurring revenue. They are actually able to communicate with their customers. They're able to monitor their customers' behavior, so they see how the customers are using their products, and so completely changing their business model for the better. And it's really fun too, because for that particular client of mine, their people didn't know anything much about technology really per se prior to doing this, and it really is not that hard to get going. And that's another trend I think that's really interesting, is that the barriers to deliver these kinds of solutions is much lower than it used to be, because the cost of sensors is coming down, the commoditization of web services and cloud-based assets, the compute model and the storage that's fully elastic, so you only pay for what you use, in addition to some of the advances in AI and sort of that. On the converse of that, going back to the point of cybersecurity, because that barrier has been lowered, you are seeing a preponderance of new apps and new products that are hitting the market, both from an IoT perspective as well as smart city. And it's going to make the need for cybersecurity even that more acute.
Yeah, and Bill, I'm going to just jump in. I know we're going to talk about cybersecurity, but that's one of the problems right now. And it's always been there, is that it's always been the rush to get the innovative technology out there without thinking of the security or privacy, out of the gate. And one of the Silicon Valley, expressions is, don't worry, be crappy. If I have that innovation, I get it out there first, I'll fix those bugs down the line, but I want to be the first to market. And that's still out there. And that now with these smart cities and other connectivity, that's a problem. But we'll get to that shortly.
Right. All right, folks, this is an eye chart. You're all going to have to memorize this. We're going to have a quiz at the end. No, I really just wanted to point out the fact that you have sort of the enterprise cloud layer. Then you have sort of some of the local software that happens, and then embedded software, which is the control and supervision layer that usually shows up in the form of firmware, and then machine level kind of devices and sensors. But if you notice, security is throughout, and this is an area where I feel like, and I've been guilty of this myself in the past, in a rush to market, just to get a product out the door, you're sort of like, hey, we'll get to the security when we get there, or we'll catch it during the penetration test. We'll hire Praetorian or one of these other firms to come in at the end and capture all of the badness and before we ship. But that was then. This is now. Nowadays, people are looking at this right from the start. What is their security strategy? What is their security and manageability? So it kind of follows the way the PC went. One of my jobs at Microsoft was I was in charge of System Center Config Manager, which was a way to manage PCs and secure them. And it's very similar now in that, you don't have to worry just about managing these devices. You actually have to worry about how do I secure them? And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that, but I just wanted to point that out. So why is IoT important? This is an upcoming study that we're going to publish a little bit late or earlier in 2021. So you're getting a little bit of a sneak preview here. So this is sort of the impact that we see from IoT across 9 major settings. And some of these settings are cross-pollinate. So in the case of cities, there are also things like fleet management and autonomous vehicles that are a part of city infrastructure, as well as I mentioned smart buildings. So for instance, smart policing applications that are doing things like gunshot detection over here in cities are also being tied in with camera or cloud-hosted video from office buildings or things like that. So all in all, we estimate between 6 to 13 trillion over the next decade of new value being created. So really robust market, and one of the largest ones, or most important ones, is the concept of cities. So we're going to switch gears a little bit now and talk about cities. And you did mention this, Kev. The pandemic. You and I were talking about this yesterday. This was a really interesting quote from Arundhati Roy in the Financial Times this spring, where she pointed out the fact that, and I'm seeing this, in virtually all of our settings, that this pandemic, there's a lot of badness that's coming about from it, but there's also a lot of change that's being forced that is happening that is allowing us to rethink the way we approach cities and we approach other solutions for citizens. And it's really interesting, I just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with the woman who was in charge of smart cities for a major Asian city, a capital city in Asia that's a former Soviet bloc nation. And the forward-looking that she is doing and the types of systems that she's setting up blew my mind. She has things like my level of service at my division of motor vehicles. You have to be able to do any transaction within 5 minutes of logging on the website. I mean, I was like, hey, I want that in Massachusetts. So, and from a country that you never would have expected it from, say, 10 years ago. So this is something that we point out, is that if you look at the percent of people that are in cities or living in urban areas, and even we've actually revised these numbers post-COVID. So, there's been many people fleeing the cities, during this COVID pandemic, but our forward-looking research is showing that urbanization is going to continue over the next 10 years, so that the percent of people living in cities is about 55% right now. It's going to grow to 60 by 2030, and by 2050, we're predicting it to be about 70% of the world's population all living within cities. What's really interesting too is that you see major rises in places like Africa and whatnot. So there's a need to be able to provide services at the city layer, whether it's the government or someone that serves the city, like a trash collector or a private trash collector or something like that, to be able to serve more people with the same or less resources. And therefore, technology is becoming more and more important. This is a fairly simple diagram, but I'll just kind of talk about what we mean by smart cities. Is this concept of taking at the bottom layer the traditional infrastructure of a city, whether it's your buildings, your roads, or people, police and fire and vehicles and things like that, connecting them through a series of technologies and applications up to an intelligence layer. And the intelligence layer does a couple of different things. It both informs, so it gives people that the timely information they need to make good decisions, or it actually will automate some of the processes. So instead of someone having to monitor, say, traffic patterns and make adjustments of traffic lights, you now have smart urban planning kind of traffic applications that will dynamically monitor traffic. We will dynamically monitor weather, dynamically monitor things like emergencies and reroute traffic. And we see a lot of this, especially in Europe. If you've ever traveled, you may see certain bridges, for instance, in Amsterdam, that are shut down one way during certain parts of the day, and they're open for other parts of the day, or there are bollards that come up out of the ground to turn an area perhaps into a pedestrian zone during certain times of the day. And more of that is coming to the United States as well. We're working with some folks too on modernizing some of the transport systems so that you have an end-to-end connectivity between the various systems. We call it multimodal, so a multimodal transport system, so that as you're planning your journey, you may be using a bus, a train, and walking, or some other form of transportation, and having all of those coordinate with each other so that it becomes like a Google Maps meets your MBTA application. And we're seeing that in many different settings.
Now, Bill, can I just jump in here? When we look
Yeah.
at, I'm looking at this map here, it's great. Who's running, everything's connected here. Is this something where it's the government's running, this cloud here? Or is this something where it's a private public collaboration? How is this going to work, or how is it working?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question, Kev. And we see a compendium of virtually every type of model. Generally, it tends to be a public-private kind of solution. And you see vendors that are focusing 100% on public sector, like, for instance, like a company like Cubic. Cubic does payment transaction systems for public transit systems. And they'll be the solution provider, and someone at within a city transport system will contract them, either outsource that altogether, or in most cases now you see some network operations center being run inside of a city, and then they're using cloud-based applications with dashboards and whatnot to manage these different applications. And we're also seeing the hyperscalers, the Amazons, the Microsofts and Googles, who are really starting to pay attention to this space. Like in Microsoft's world, they call it smart spaces. And for them, smart spaces is cities, things like stadiums or outdoor spaces, plazas, as well as smart buildings. And so they have the concept of what they call a digital twin that they're building for smart cities. And a digital twin is a digital representation of a physical object. So we've had these, for instance, in manufacturing for a long time, where you have a digital twin of your factory, where you can do what if scenarios of what if we increase the production here, what if we change the viscosity of a particular piece of equipment here to sort of optimize your plant. Microsoft is now taking that to the city world. So you start to see a 3D representation, digital representation of the city and all of the people that are interacting with it. And you can do a lot of really cool what if scenarios, but also get real-time information that is shareable. One of the things that has been a challenge is that if you look at most cities, even the ones that are very well managed, their IT infrastructure is very fragmented. So if the police have implemented some type of smart policing type of technology, or if the fire department has implemented some kind of sensor-based way to determine if there's problems with the water pressure, for instance, throughout the city, that data is usually siloed and not shared among the different agencies. And that's where I think the next big leap is happening at some of the more forward-looking cities. And then the other thing that I find that's
a good point, Bill. I was going to jump in.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you that because I'm just thinking the city of Boston. You have the city of Boston, but we also know we have the state, right? So we have Massport. They run. That's not the city, but they're in the city. Different roads belong to the state that don't belong to the city. And how do they work together? It's not only agencies. You're talking about different governments.
Right. Right. It's a good point, and that's the sort of the democratization of data is also another concept that we see quite often, and sort of the ability to securely store data so that only the people who should have access to it get access. This is a big challenge that also, if you look at like Microsoft and Amazon and Google, they're really trying to help solve that problem. And that, you know, the challenge there, I think, is for the US, it's not so much of a challenge, but for some of the other governments around the world, they don't necessarily want to offload some of their core infrastructure to US vendors. So it's another big challenge that we see in overall adoption. And obviously in China, you have Alibaba and other Tencent and other cloud vendors that are in the same boat, but they've been able to obviously dictate a lot of the standards that they'll implement in the cities. It looks like we have a question.
Bill, yeah, I got a question. I was going to read it right off to you. It's a great question. It's talking about 5G. You know, what's the impact? First, do we need the cities to lobby to get the 5G in here? And I think that's coming. And then two, what's the impact of 5G on all of this?
Oh, great. Yeah, that's a good question. There's also another question from Julia Devoy that we'll answer as well. So when it comes to 5G, there's sort of two primary benefits. One is ultra high bandwidth. So being able to move large amounts of data in very small amounts of time. And you've probably all seen the ads from Verizon and AT&T and others where you can download a whole, Netflix movie in 10 seconds or 3 seconds or whatever it happens to be. Because there's 2 orders of magnitude difference in the amount of data that you can download in the same amount of time. There's also another key benefit is ultra low latency. So the amount of time that an event takes to actually get to the access point or to the decision point or action point is dramatically decreased with 5G versus traditional 4G and other even Wi-Fi type of settings. So that will unshackle many different use cases, primarily around when you're talking about cities' autonomous vehicles. Because autonomous vehicles, you cannot have an autonomous bus or truck, for instance, that has to go up to the cloud and takes a few seconds to turn around and figure out that the light just turned red and it has to now stop on a dime, or somebody stepped off the sidewalk in front of them and they have to stop or recognize something. So autonomous vehicles is definitely one of those things. And I think, one of the things that we're working with one smart city in the US right now, where their autonomous vehicles are not sort of roaming around on city streets the way you've sort of seen them advertised by some of the vehicle makers. It's really, they're creating like an underground set of roadways that for that last mile delivery. So if you think about all of the delivery trucks that come into a city right now and come into the CBD or the central business district of a city, those trucks are, they're idling at lights, they're stopping in front of buildings and things like that. In this particular city that we're helping them create, all of that stuff is underground, and most of it is going to be done with electric unmanned vehicles, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, no, Bill, I'm just bringing this because when we talk about the security of these autonomous vehicles and these smart cities, I saw this great presentation last year. It was done by Stuart Madnick over at MIT, and it was, talking about, what would happen if all the cars were instead of, don't hit someone, you hit someone. Like in his presentation, it was humorous the way he approached it. Was, like these are weapons of mass destruction. But when you step back, and then he had everything playing out, it was like, wow, how do we handle that?
Yeah, it's a good point, Kev. We have a section at the end where we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that, but it's definitely a problem or a challenge, and the technology isn't there yet. So you really solve it the way you solve other cybersecurity challenges right now, which is through processes and multiple systems. Like I used to work with a bunch of engineers from the Israeli defense forces, and they said, these guys were experts at hacking into systems, and they would brag and say there's not a system in the world that they can't hack into, including their own. And the only way that they could defend it would be by multiple cybersecurity defense systems that would have trigger points that if they would hope that they could detect the attack by the time it got to the third or fourth ring of defense, and they had 9 or 10 rings, and therefore they could react and rearm themselves from a security perspective. And I think we're seeing the same thing with smart cities, but it's definitely an area that I see a lot of innovation that has to happen, and a lot more investment that has to happen over the next few years.
Bill, what we'll do is we have some questions. We'll get to those at the end so we can move along here. But one question I have here with, like, we're talking about smart cities, everyone think like, how does this happen, right? So I'm thinking of a city of Boston. Is this more of an ad hoc approach where they're going, it's just organically different, like you talked about the seaport, but is that the same that's going on in Dorchester or different neighborhoods within the city? Or do some cities come in, and they look like, hey, we're going to go smart, and they start from the scratch, across the board, bottom up?
Right. Yeah, this kind of dovetails with the question that Christopher Andrews just posted around that, he lives in a 30,000 person city in Maine, and they have crappy wireless there. They don't even have good wireless there, never mind, autonomous vehicles and 5G. And I think that's another area that we have to be careful as a society to not continue this digital divide between the haves and the have-nots. You hear about things like food deserts, right? For instance, in some parts of cities, and I see tech deserts too, and so think about even just the work from home or the school from home. If you're a kid who lives in a town where you have great Wi-Fi and your parents have paid for the top of the line Wi-Fi, and you have a trampoline in your backyard and you have a great, tablet in your own room, yeah, distance learning isn't so hard. But if you're a kid that is in Charlestown or Dorchester or somewhere, and maybe you're sharing a bedroom with another sibling, like I did growing up with 3 other siblings, how do you, and you're working on a hand-me-down tablet on a crappy Wi-Fi or LTE connection, how can you continue to keep up? Even if you're the smartest kid in the class, you're going to fall behind. So I think this is forcing a lot of these conversations, and I'm encouraged because, like, I'll give you an example. A lot of the big cities in Europe have already developed their smart city strategy. London, Paris, Rome, Barcelona, very forward thinking. They have teams of dozens, in some cases hundreds of people thinking about how do we serve our citizens better. We recently worked with the EU in helping to understand what a lot of those solutions were, and we did a study. It was all donated time from both the consultants as well as companies like Microsoft and Amazon and others, where we took a lot of the best ideas and said, how do we make those ideas and those technologies available to the next 100 cities in Europe?
Right.
So we're looking at cities between 50 and 200,000 citizens. And because they don't have the dedicated IoT or IT departments, they don't have a team of data scientists. So how can we build out some of that infrastructure? And I'm hoping that we can see the same type of thing in the US. And, in talking to a lot of the leaders, they all kind of commit to it or want to do it. The challenge oftentimes comes down to funding, and sort of the variability of politicians. They're really caring about their next election oftentimes, and therefore you can lose momentum if you're relying purely on the political side of the equation. And that's where, public-private partnerships have become very prevalent throughout the best way to try to deliver these solutions, so that you get forward-looking companies that are companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft that are trying to build out some of these solutions, and some of the telcos as well. And hopefully that's where things become most interesting going forward. So I just want to use a couple of these pages. Um, you know, you folks, we'll give you all these pages afterward, but really, if you look at it from a city perspective, it kind of falls across these different areas. I had one mayor in South America say to me that if I could reduce each of his people's commute time by 15 minutes each way, he'd be reelected for the rest of his life. All about time and convenience. So how can you save commute time? Because in his city, the average commute time is 90 minutes each way for the average citizen. Brutal, and so if you can give people back time, it's a hugely valuable commodity. Time spent dealing with government or dealing with health related things or getting health services. This is another area. So these are some of the metrics or the dimensions by which we're measuring cities. And it's pretty neat when you see it done well, when you see the cities that are saying things like, we want to, dramatically reduce the assaults or robberies, or how long does it take for an ambulance to pick someone up and get them the critical care that they need? Those kinds of things. If you look at environmental quality, not just air quality, but also like tying in the water supply and some of the issues that you're dealing with either carbon emissions or other types of using resources. There's lots of very simple technologies that will allow us to drive much more efficiencies of those. And then also, everybody cares about jobs, whether you're the municipality or the country level or the city level, that want their citizens to be thriving. And so are there ways that you can make training more available to your citizens, retraining, reskilling, and those kinds of things. And then a major obstacle right now too has been cost of living in cities, and COVID has kind of changed a lot of that, brought the cost of living down a bit with respect to rents and things like that. But we think that's just a temporary downturn. But what can we do to overall, reduce the cost of living for the citizens in these different cities? I wanted to just point this out, that I did mention sort of things like water supply. There is the haves and the have-nots happening, and that's where, as collectively as citizens of the world, we have to be thinking about how do we make sure that South America has the right water and energy and food resources, or Central America. You see what's going on in Southeast Asia with water shortages being a major issue, food shortages, food in India. So are there ways that we can use technology? And we have found that there's ways to use technology to be able to solve some of these problems.
Now, Bill, no, I'll let you go to this slide and then I'll ask my question. Go ahead.
Okay, no, go ahead.
Yeah, this is bringing it back to like the cybersecurity piece. And, we jokingly talked about this last night. It's like, hey, this looks fantastic. We're going to have, smart traffic lights, water treatment, things along those lines, the infrastructure, when a bridge, could be impacted, like don't go on the bridge because it looks like, it could be falling, things along those lines, because we have those sensors. And, right now in, the cyberverse, we have issues where, companies, we're giving them, a personally identifiable information, and they can't even protect that. I mean, every day you look, there's a breach, and now we're talking about, possibly, governments building on top of legacy computers, thinking of all these smart city, and which is wonderful, right? It's great to look at the future, but are they looking at security first? Is that like at the forefront, or is it more like, hey, we're going to do this, and then we'll worry about security after the fact, like what we talked about early on when we started off?
Right. Unfortunately, I think it's more of the latter still. It depends on the maturity of the city. So in the cases of like Barcelona or Boston or New York or London, they've already gone through sort of the pilot phase of these different technologies, and now they understand the infrastructure components of it, and they do have CISOs, they have security teams, they're hiring, you know, black hat kind of people to sort of hack into the systems and get ahead of potential problems. But even in those very well managed cities, the challenge comes with some of the tools that they're using. So in the case of, you know, with a cloud resource, you're doing pretty well if you're using, you know, Amazon, Microsoft, or Google, because you're leveraging all of their collective security, or IBM, or any of the major vendors, Cisco and others. You're leveraging the years and decades of security that they've built into their products and services. However, I have seen some of the, you know, more innovative startups that are coming to market with products that have huge security vulnerabilities built into them. And, you know, we obviously will as part of our implementation team, we always have a full cybersecurity audit, and we have multiple audits when we're engaging with our clients. But I'm fearful that not all of that, there's still not that same rigor. It's trending in the right direction, but I think going back to the point and some of the questions that came up, I think people are still trying to get solutions to market quickly, and sometimes don't think through security all the way. The good news is that governments themselves are starting to wake up to this, and they're starting to create mandates and governing rules that will ensure the proper levels of security, both from a data perspective, the vulnerability of critical assets like water supply or power supply, as well as protection of privacy of the citizens, because that's another big area. Obviously, lots of you think a hospital has a lot of private information about somebody. Imagine, you know, what a city or a state government has.
Yeah, I was going to go to that too, but before I go there, I was just thinking along the lines of, well, first on the privacy piece, you know, who's protecting that, who's storing it, you know, how long are they keeping it? So now at the city, they might have everything on me, where I drive every day, what type of ice cream I get, what bus I take. They have all this information, and you know, what are they using it for? Are they selling it? You know, so now all these ads pop up, and I see things along those lines.
Right. And then, yeah, these are the ethical questions that have to be answered. And literally, we see people trying to grapple with these almost every day, and there's no set answer. So, like, for instance, I was working with a Middle Eastern city that is designing itself to be the ultimate vacation destination for people, or retirement destination for people who want a healthy lifestyle. So they're going to have horseback riding and boats that you have access to, and all the greatest doctors available to you, and all these great things. And as part of that, they're going to be doing things like tracking. They're going to have health trackers on your arm, and be able to, but you're going to be able to opt into that. But you are opting in. I've seen other less, you know, egalitarian kind of cultures where they're forcing people to wear contact tracers, for instance. You know, in parts of China, the reason why they've been able to sort of curtail the spread of COVID-19 is because they're very strict about the way people have to wear certain devices and things like that. Not optimal, and it obviously would not work in a free society. So the other thing that we've seen is that it's sort of the carrot versus the stick, and we see, if you can build something that's super useful for someone, they're willing to give up some of their privacy for it. And we see this obviously with social media.
The online ordering of pizza was the greatest invention for me. You know, like, if they ask me for my, you know, license number, you know, people, you know, joke, but people pump that in there, and it's like, why are they collecting that information, right? It's the efficiency over privacy.
Right.
Another question I had for you, and this is the weakest link we always talk about in cybersecurity, and you know, 85% to 90% of breaches are caused by humans, right? So right here, you look, okay, this is great, this benefits humans, but where does that link come in? Because now you have all of us who, you know, maybe people on this webinar now, we think cybersecurity, right? But think of everyone else. No one's really thinking of it that way. And what's the impact and how are they thinking about that?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's, they all need to think about that. And that's where having an actual CISO is becoming more and more important for cities and municipalities.
Yeah.
There's another question that came in.
Yeah, we have about
Yeah.
What I was going to do, we'll let you go for another 5 minutes, Bill, then we'll take the questions. We got some great ones.
So the page that you see here is just sort of an architecture, a very high level view. The point I wanted to make from a security perspective is that the big difference here is that your attack area is much higher because there's so many more devices that are available to be attacked. Before, when you had a network that was inside your own company, yeah, you had to worry about people perhaps hacking into your network, or more likely hacking into somebody's laptop that would attach to your network, and that's the way most attacks came in. Now you're going to have all of these different services where you could see somebody hacking in through a light post. You could see somebody hacking in through any kind of infrastructure that's out there, a police car. So the attack surface is much greater. The variability in the types of technologies that people are using is also greater. And so it does become definitely a huge area and it's an area actually where we see a lot of growth going forward. So I also won't spend a lot of time on this page, but I wanted to point out the fact that when you look at IoT security, there's multiple layers of security. There's the same things or devices, as I mentioned, so sort of like edge devices, or the equipment makers like ARM or Qualcomm and so forth. Then you have the connectivity solutions, sort of like the traditional managed service providers, and then the mobile network operators, and connectivity management platforms, CMP platforms from companies like Cisco, Jasper, Ericsson, or Nokia. Then you have the standard, end-to-end or horizontal IoT. Each one of these represents an attack point, and so thinking through security at all of these layers is not a one-person job. What you end up seeing is a variety of security experts that are coming from, many of them come from your traditional building security teams, to IT teams, to firmware developers. So it becomes a much more daunting task when you're talking about this confluence of IT and OT, or operational technology, from a security perspective.
Yeah, there's a couple of national security concerns here when I see Huawei up there.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and so you're seeing some of the systems integrators develop practices, and I'm sure you've worked with them, Kevin, inside the program, where they're developing, complete full stack practices, because it's not easy. The point I wanted to make on this page was sort of that there's lots of different diverse requirements, different types of devices. All of the connected devices some of them are sending data to multiple repositories. Some of them are streaming data real time, while others are doing things like batching a bunch of data together. Data is sometimes sitting at the edge of the network where it's being pre-processed. So for instance, you might not want to send all of the security video that is being captured at a traffic light. But if an incident happens, then you want it to start processing, and at that edge device, it might be capturing the relevant data, adding metadata to it, in the forms of data collection from other sources and things like that. And so you're seeing some of these players emerge that are pure IoT security lifecycle management vendors, like Gemalto, Forescout, Zingbox, and Armis, and some of which are also doing the hardware and software security. And by the way, this is just representative. There's about 100 different players that are playing in different aspects of this right now, and it's still sort of being built out. It's for those people who are part of the program, Kevin, part of your master's program, there's going to be a lot of opportunities and a lot of job opportunities going forward, and new ideas to get funded. We talked to venture capital and private equity firms, and they're all excited about funding these kinds of ideas because they see it as a big new horizon. This is one of the last pages I'll use here. If you look at from a cybersecurity perspective, ultimately IT and OT is really not that much different than your traditional PC and mobiles, other than the fact that I mentioned it's a much bigger attack surface. You have to go through the same type of levels of segments of cybersecurity, where you're making sure that you have a proper identity and access management system, you have the proper network security, you have the all of the different data security tools built in, and then managing it throughout the entire process. So ultimately, these devices end up looking just like other user devices to a security officer, but there's just millions of them, and therefore you need to automate the monitoring and securing of those devices. And as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of them. We can share these pages with you folks if you're interested in taking a look.
No, Bill, on the regulatory front, I'm just looking at all of this, and been looking at it's. I mean, all the policies we have in place right now, across the board, you're dealing with law enforcement, you're dealing with privacy issues, how you set up and secure data, how do you secure the data through the different frameworks. A lot of this is going to have to be changed, right? So it's really, we're moving forward with these smart cities. Have you seen, through your work, conversations along the lines of like, hey, before we do this, we better make sure we have, the state legislature involved, the city government, the federal government, so we're not way ahead of things, and then we can't do what we want to do. We invest all this money, and now due to regulatory constraints, we can't actually, help anyone.
No, it's a good point. And I think that's where we've seen some of the bigger players come in driving some of those conversations. But like is the case oftentimes with many new technologies, they're way out ahead of the government in the ways they're thinking about them. So, unfortunately, also the bad guys are also way out ahead of the government in thinking about ways that they're going to either cheat the system or steal people's data and things like that. I would like to see more centralized and cooperative types of consortia, especially in North America, on these problems. I think they're doing a pretty good job in Europe in dealing with it. And as I mentioned, some of the Asian governments are actually dealing with these issues better in that they're getting out ahead of them, and they have a little bit more authority. Their cultures are more open to taking centralized government recommendations or control. So.
Yeah, and I was going to mention this, and then we'll go to the questions, because this is I could go for another 4 hours on this, Bill. I just want to keep talking, because you really look, this is a federal issue in many ways, right? Because we're talking about critical infrastructure here, and that's where the Department of Homeland Security should be involved in anything that's going on here, every step of the way. And that's where we could have, just think of Boston. You have federal, state, local, and then you get into all the different just in the city of Boston, you have Dorchester, Roxbury, Charlestown, like it breaks off that way.
Right.
If they're all doing things siloed, it's almost like a company that's not focused on a holistic approach to cybersecurity. Or coming in with systems, right? And so we're building on different legacy computers. It could be very problematic.
Yeah, DHS is doing actually a pretty good job. If you look at their website, they've thought through a lot of these issues, and they have some good recommended policies.
But I guess the question is, are they getting pulled in?
Right, they're not getting pulled in, and they're not manifesting in the form of adhered to regulations or laws just yet. So, yeah.
All right, so. Bill, I'm going to go with the question. Yeah, there's no shortage of questions here. So I'll read off the questions to you, and we can go from there. So we'll start with Julia's. Her question was, the innovation push And first mover to market is a long-standing practice problem. Like was said, don't worry, be crappy. Clearly, security issues of the rush to market are a deep concern. Is there a way to strategically link security to optimal formative individual and social ethical human development? And follow up, could this be forward-looking and a compelling lens to embed both in the future of cities?
Wow, that's quite a question.
She has her PhD.
Yeah, obviously. It's a great idea, and I have seen the EU sort of looking at it this way, minus Britain, and I have not seen it really take shape yet in some of the smart cities I've dealt with in North America. But we're a little bit behind our European counterparts when it comes to adopting some of these technologies. But it's a great idea, Julia.
Okay, so next we have from Nicholas Barrett. The data exists today, but do you think we'll eventually do the time subtraction from point A to point B of an easy pass or other road sensors to determine who gets a speeding ticket? Example, car A had an average speed of 90 miles per hour to reach point B, toll, etc.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing it in some locations already, where people are getting these phantom tickets, and they also have the facial recognition tied to it, so they can't even deny that they were driving. It's very much Minority Report kind of stuff, or Big Brother-ish. In many of the Western cultures, I don't think that would fly. But in other parts of the world, it will. And I would not be surprised to see in the next few years that start to become more prevalent going forward. And look at the converse of it. The insurance companies right now give you a discount by, if you're willing to put a tracker in your device, they'll give you a discount on your insurance, 15 or 20%, if you're a safe driver. And so the converse of it is, if you're an aggressive driver, they may be watching you. So,
all right, we got one here from Fred Cohen, big fan of ours and a good friend. Will cities likely outsource the IoT infrastructure, compute environment, and application rollout to third parties? It seems that all, but the largest major cities can't afford to host and maintain such a complex infrastructure.
Yeah, I totally agree. The mega cities can kind of do it on their own. One of the things I've seen happen in Europe and parts of China is regionalization. So much like you see with high schools here, where you'll see two or three towns come together with a regional high school, I'm seeing regionalization of IT and smart city assets. So you'll see 4 or 5 cities that maybe are 50,000 to 100,000 people that will create their combined data center or network operations center.
Great, and that touches upon Olivia's question too. All right, so I have some questions in the chat I'm going to go to. Oops, here we go. Wow. Okay, that was the 5G question. Here we go. Do the smart city planning design discussion include maintenance cost considerations, i.e. tax increases, thinking of software updates, firmware updates, security monitoring, etc.? Who absorbs the cost of all these offsets as a result of adding a smart layer to existing infrastructure? Wow, great question.
No, it's a great question. And actually, this is a big area that we end up spending a lot of time, because the technology is really not that hard to solve. We always end up spending more time with our clients on these kinds of issues. And some of it is, is the service part of something that was maybe supplanting a prior service? So a classic example is waste removal for a city. Well, if you start to develop, if you're going to bring in automated bin detection, like waste bins, something like Big Belly Solar, where local company that does the solar powered trash barrels around the city, that is an IoT app. It's determining when a barrel needs to be emptied, and then optimizing the fleet to go out and capture it at that time. Well, if you were New York City and you're looking to do something like that, are you supplanting an existing vendor who has had a long time relationship with the city and relies on that contract that for the waste removal? So in those cases, we've seen the ability for the municipality or the city to go back to the primary vendor and say, hey, we want you to invest in this with us, so that they are still the primary vendor, but they might be using some new technology. The other thing is, in some cases, cities starting to think about how to monetize assets of theirs. So in the big thing that it's going to happen with 5G, we didn't talk about the density capabilities or requirements of 5G. So if you think about 5G access points or cell towers, in a current 4G topography, you need about one cell tower per 1 square kilometer of land. In that same square kilometer of land, you'll need about 40 to 50 cellular access points for 5G because of the difference in the waves. So we're not talking about giant cell towers that you're used to seeing around a city. You're talking about smaller micro access points that might be at the underside of a manhole cover or embedded inside of a light post at an intersection, or hanging off the side of a municipal building. And so all of the telco companies are trying to stampede toward their building out their 5G infrastructure, and cities happen to own a lot of assets and real estate. So cities can start to monetize that asset in that way by renting out that space and becoming a mini tower player. And we've actually worked with some of the existing tower companies like American Tower, who are acting as sort of the broker or manager, property manager, for lack of a better term, for the cities in that regard. So it's sort of changing their business model as well. And then finally, people are looking at ways to fund these projects with public-private types of funding. Is there a way that you could give people access to data, or give vendors access to data that the citizens don't mind you sharing, that would potentially provide them better services? And there are certain vendors who are willing to pay for that data.
All right, we'll go with one more question here, and to sum it up, it's a long question, but it really comes down to: do you think the move to smart cities is going to increase the need for a common framework? And what we're talking about here is like the NIST or the ISO different standards. My answer is no. I think the frameworks are in place and they build upon each other. You have different industries and things along those lines. So what works for one industry might not work for the other, but there is a common base that goes across the board 85%. So Bill, your take.
Yeah, so there's certain technical standards that could definitely, they have to be adhered to. From a data format, from a connectivity perspective, and whatnot. From a what is ethical and what is one person's perfectly ethical application is another person's big brother application. So I think a lot of it is, I had a page earlier in the presentation where it showed the citizen at the center, and that's one of the things we try to talk to municipalities about is put yourself in the citizen's shoes. What does the citizen want from this particular service? What would they want to do with the data? What would they want you to do with the data? And so forth. And then also, is there a way you can make it so that the citizen owns their data? This is a bigger challenge than beyond just smart cities. Hospitals are grappling with the same thing, and other, social media platforms are grappling with it, and so forth.
All right. Well, Bill, this has been fascinating. I really want to thank you for taking the time to come here. We just had one other question just popped in. It was, what is the best high school on Morrissey Boulevard? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
There's only one.
There's only one. Boston College High School, it is. We're double eagles today.
The best cello player in Arkansas, right?
Right. There you go.
So,
Yeah, no, but really, thanks, Bill. It was a pleasure having you here. It was very informative, and we look forward to having you back on campus really soon. And for everyone out there, thanks for taking the time to participate. We're going to have our next webinar will be the end of January. On that one, we have Tom Schola, who's Chief Information Security Officer over at John Hancock Manulife, and Joanna Baltus, who is the former Chief of Staff of the Deputy Director of the FBI and Senior Advisor to the Assistant Attorney General down at DOJ for National Security. And what they're going to discuss here on this next panel is building a cyber culture, and getting buy-in not only from the board and the C-suite, but getting buy-in by the employees as well. So with that, thanks everyone. Have a happy and safe holiday, and hope to see everyone back on campus in person really, really soon. So with that, take care.